I'm actually an evangelist at Paymill. So my Twitter and my GitHub account, so. I'm going to tell you today about what I learned while rebuilding the new version of the documentation for Paymill. It's not out yet. It's still a work in progress, but it's almost done. And during the course of writing all this new documentation, I learned a lot of things that I would like to share with you today. But first, I would like just to clarify a few things. So first, developer evangelism. What is the truth about evangelism? Actually, what we do is go to events and have drinks afterwards. That's actually what we do. But I figured out at some point that managing relationships with developer communities were going a bit further than being outside on events and meeting people. It was as well taking care of all the resources you provide to your developers and the global way you handle relationship with them. So the developer relations are kind of a gatekeeper for all the developer resources. So I'm going to tell you some more facts about this little thing which we call developer relations. So first, if your product is an API, if you're an API provider, you just can't bypass developer relations because developer will be your main users. So some companies are just like, okay, we're just gonna sell our product on a normal way, and they just don't focus on selling them to developers directly. But today we know that developers are most of the time decision makers in the process of adopting new tools and new products. The problem is, developers are kind of a difficult crowd. I guess most of you here are developers. I am one as well. And it's really hard to sell a product to a developer because when you go and just start talking about your product, people will just thought, okay, he's trying to sell me something. And I like to say that developers have a bullshit detector. Like when you go on a business meeting and try to sell your product, with normal marketing process, you will just say, oh, our product is awesome because it does A, Y, Z. And people will say, oh, okay, it looks great. And if you have a good salesman and marketing guys, you will end up selling your product. With developers, if your product is not good, they will just see it. So you need special people to talk to developers. And we usually say, okay, but developers don't care about packaging. And by packaging, I mean not only the way your website or these kind of things, but as well the way you will present your product in a global way. And is it true that developers really don't care about packaging? Yeah, it's not. Developers do care about packaging. Developers do like fancy stuff. We like to go when we were looking for a new product, a new solution. We like to go on the website and see a nice website with fancy stuff for us. Like yeah, tech people love fancy stuff. They love presenting with a Mario armband instead of normal remote controller, even if it's completely useless. Because yeah, we like fancy stuff. But generally, we're not good at packaging stuff properly. Like when I started rebuilding the documentation, my IT team was like, okay, we want something like API docs, like black and white, only the reference, all the structure, and we'll see later that it's not necessarily a good way to do it when you see it from the point of view of developer relations. So what was the solution for a company when you want to package your thing properly but still be able to talk to developers and present your product to developers? That's what we call dev relations, basically. It's marketing by tech people for tech people. So people who know how to talk to people like them. So this was just a point on dev relations because the documentation is included in the process of building good developer relations. So the first question we should be asking ourselves is, what is the documentation for? Like, does anyone here have an idea? What is the purpose of having a documentation for your product? Yeah, that's right. First, it will be to get started and to help your users know how to use your product, because if you're just like giving your API without any information, people will have to try every possible endpoint. I mean, at least for normal REST APIs, I know now we're starting to do things with automatic discovery and all these kind of things. But for traditional APIs, you will have to try every possible endpoint on your API, and it's not possible. So, of course, the main purpose of your documentation is just show the way to your user into your product. But that's just one aspect, and most of the time it's the only aspect people take into consideration. You have other things you have to take into consideration. Is your documentation is a marketing tool as well. Like when we are looking for a new product, at least this is what I'm doing. Let's say, for example, I'm looking for a payment provider. I will look at all the payment providers on the market, and most of the time pricing is more or less the same. So what will make the difference? Like, I will be looking at the documentation sites, and if it's unreadable, if it's really ugly, it might be functional. I'm still not a user, I'm just a prospect. I'm a potential user, but I'm not. So I don't need to have easy access to all the reference or whatever yet. I really need to understand why it will make my life easier, and the website, the documentation website, have to reflect this easiness you will provide to your user. It builds trust, because it's exactly the same. You might have a really good product, an awesome API. If when your user go to your documentation site, it's not clear, they don't understand what the product is about, they really don't understand how they will be able to implement it, if it will fit into that technological stack, all these kind of things, they will just turn out to a competitor who does. So this is really important for your user to trust your product. So the question is, okay, that's great, but how do we practically do it? How do you shape your documentation to build that trust, to just make people want to use your product? First, you won't build a documentation. I like to call that a resources center, which is a bit different, because a documentation usually is you go on a website, you have the normal website with everything like blah features, all that kind of things, and you have, like in the menu somewhere, an item saying documentation. You click on it, it's still the same website, and here you have the doc about how to use the product, which is cool. But you need, when you have a technical product like an API, and the technical users are your main target or one of your main targets, you have to give them more value. So just build a separate website, just shaped for developers. Like even if it's still for marketing purpose, when you go onto a developer website, you're not looking for the same information you will have on a regular website. You don't need to know if it's cheap enough. If you have concerns about the price, you can still go on the normal website. But as a developer, when you choose a product, you want to see if it's easy to use, these kind of things. So that's the main information you would like to highlight. And on a normal marketing website for your company, you would not highlight, hey, it's very easy to implement, because if you have an e-commerce owner wanting to implement payment into his system, he really doesn't care about the implementation first. He wants to know if it's cheap or not, and if it can work for his e-commerce system. For a developer, he really wants to know if it's easy to implement. So just build a separate website with other kind of information, which is the first point. And the second point is it gives value to the developer coming to your documentation center. Will just think, okay, this company is really taking care of its technical users, because they are building a separate website for us with all the resources we need. And that's very important as well, to make your users feel really valued. And that will really help them trust your product, because they will understand that everything will be made for them. If they have a problem, they will find support. They will find all the resources for implementing, etc. So usually some companies do that, deploying a website on a separate subdomain, usually developers.company.com or dev.company.com. And I will show you a few examples of that. For example, it's very small, but this one is the documentation for the Braintree payment system. So you can see here that you have all the information needed to get started and to access the docs regarding what you need. So you have, I don't know, a PHP stack and you want to get started implementing a recurring payment form for subscriptions, you will really easily find the information you need in that website. This is the homepage, and you see it's very different from a regular homepage for a website. This is Twitter Developer Center, available on dev.twitter.com. It's very different because it serves another purpose, because Twitter is not directly a product dedicated towards technical users, but they have some internal technical product to promote. So here, you see you have not direct access to the documentation, but instead you have links to some features, some products like Fabric that you can access just to use them in your application, because their interest here is to push some of their products. So this is more oriented on marketing purpose. And the third one is a mix of both, which is somewhere in between, which is the Facebook Developer Center, where you have information on various products, you have news that are really interesting and relevant for developers, and you have links to docs. So these are three kinds of developer center you could have, but every time you see something very different than the normal website, and often with a different design that suits more developers, etc. So just separate this into separate resources. It has to be easy to maintain. That is very important, because if your documentation is not easy to maintain, it will be outdated most of the time. That's what happened with Paymill for a while, because every time we needed to update something in the documentation, it required us to just create a ticket for the IT and ask them to change manually the HTML page for the current documentation. You just can't do that, because most of the time those guys were really busy and it would take time to be updated. And when a user finds a typo or something wrong in your documentation, it gives feedback, and 1 week later the feedback is still not implemented. Your users are really pissed and they are losing trust into your product. So make it really easy to maintain. And the last thing which you should really consider is make it open source. So publish your sources, for example, on GitHub, and allow external users to contribute to your docs, because when a user finds a problem, if he can't contribute, he will complain to the support, he will complain on social networks, he will get really pissed because he can't use the product, and he will feel really powerless towards this bug. If he can just make a contribution, just make a pull request for fixing your docs or whatever, he won't be pissed and he will feel part of the process and he will feel valued as a user, and that's really beneficial for you. The good thing is to reward your user, like sending them swag, like stickers, t-shirts or whatever, when they really make a big contribution to your documentation. So it's very a win-win for everyone. Is it worth it open sourcing the docs? I know SendGrid did. I had this talk with their Evangelist. And yeah, it's worth it, because look at the number of commits and the number of contributors, and it's only the SendGrid documentation that's very huge. If you look at the issues, there are a lot of discussion and issues. So, okay, it's a lot to process, it's a lot to manage, to check all the issues, but making sure you're providing all the information your users need is also a lot of work. So this extra work will really pay off in the long term. Really consider it. The other thing is to pick the right tool. If someone gets this joke, I will offer him a bottle opener or something afterwards. There is no silver bullet, and you have plenty of tools at your disposal. I won't go into detail with that, because you could talk, for example, to Orlando from Mashape, which has a really good opinion on that. But you could use like full-featured tools like Mashape, APIdays, or Swagger, which might not suit all companies, which was our case. We could not use these tools. So you can use modeling language like Paymill, API Blueprint, which is the modeling language based on Markdown behind APIdays. But you can as well do custom stuff, which is more or less the way I choose for our docs. And so I will get more into detail and present you exactly what I did for Paymill for this documentation. So our case was we needed to maintain our documentation in an easier way, to make people internally in the company to contribute to the documentation, and not only IT, and just try to engage everyone on that. And we really wanted something custom that fits our current structure and process internally. So I went for a solution, a custom-built solution based on Node.js and Docpad, which is a static website generator. And for the API docs, I picked something called Slate, which is really cool, which is based on Ruby, and which allows you to make 3 panes, responsive API documentation with code snippets in multiple languages. I just customized it to be used on Node.js and to fit our global design for the Developer Center. For the content, everything is written in Markdown, so it's really easy to contribute for external developers that would like to contribute, but as well for marketing, internally, IT, everyone can use Markdown, and everything is hosted on GitHub because everyone has a GitHub account, almost. And it's really easy to control the authoring process because for authorization, everything you just have to give read-only access to your repository to external users, and they can just make pull requests, and so you can check everything, have discussion on content changes, and then merge all the changes really easily. So GitHub is a good authoring tool in this context. The way our system works is the following. It's all automated, so it really takes over all the hassle of updating the documentation. It means when a pull request is accepted or an author with the right pushes content on GitHub, it will fire a webhook on our generator. Then the generator will go to various repositories and pull the content. So we have all the code snippets in our wrappers and SDKs repository. So when an SDK developer updates the content, it changes the code snippets. And so we don't have to take care of that. We know the code snippets will always be up to date. It pulls the content from the API doc repository and from the guides repository. Then it builds all the static pages and deploys them onto the server. So everything happened after a push on GitHub. The website with the documentation was updated automatically, and we didn't have to take care of that. So it really helps us to keep our documentation up to date. So what you need to remember on that is that building a documentation is not an easy task. In the beginning, people will just think, okay, it's cool, I will just make docs explaining how to use my product, but it's not enough. Just remember, it's first an entry point for your new users. That's the first thing technical users will see about your product, about your company, and it's very important to them to feel that they can trust your product. So take the opportunity to use this documentation and resources center to give them this impression. Things you can also do on a resources center like that is put subscription links directly for 2 reasons. Because first, users will not have to go back to the main site to subscribe and create an account. But second, you can also track the amount of technical users that go to your website through the technical resources, which really helps you to optimize things. And you can really use this documentation thing to create communities around your product. Once you have a resource center, you can add things like valuable content, like news, like blog posts, and you can do like Twitter, which have forum discussion groups built into their documentation center, so users feel really involved in the process of using your product, and you create communities and people interact. And all of that just makes people be more attached to your product. They won't go somewhere else because they invested time like exchanging with other community members, contributing to your docs, everything, and so it makes a really strong user base that won't switch to another product from one day to another. So really just consider that when you are building your documentation. So I didn't go into details because I really wanted to show you how you can take most of value in your documentation and how to consider building it. It's not a general use case. I mean, every company will have a different use case. Remember the 3 different cases with Facebook, Twitter, and Braintree. But just consider it. If you have more questions on that, you can just see me afterwards or ask questions now. So thanks.
So any questions for Yann? We have time. Anyone wants to ask anything? Yes?
So if you could focus on one thing and one thing only with the documentation, what would you focus on?
I would really focus on writing guides, you know, the more guides possible for covering all the use cases my user can have. Like, for example, we can provide a recurring payment, we can provide in-app payment for mobile SDK, for mobile apps via our mobile SDKs. We can provide normal payment form, we can provide many different things, and I would write use cases for every kind of users. So you just have to go, one click, see everything, copy, paste code, and that's it. So this is really hard to do, so it's not done yet. It's more generic stuff with references for other things, but I will do this kind of tutorial, step-by-step things for all the use cases, which is a great value when users are coming, because they can straight on just choose and have kind of a selector on the main page. Okay, you've got a PHP stack, you've got an iOS front end, blah blah. You just select everything, and then you have the whole process of implementing the solution just straight on without having to look into all the docs. So that's the first thing I'm going to focus on, I guess, after the Developer Center for Paymill is released.
Hi, so I do dev relations for my company. We also use Slate, which I think is pretty awesome. However, I understand that you can put your documentation on GitHub and you can get people to be part of the community, but genuinely, like at home in your office, how do you get people to care enough to do documentation? Because I can't scale to running it. I equally don't want to go around and bully my colleagues and go, you have to do it. So kind of, is there any kind of practical things you can give me about without being violent to make them care?
Yeah, no, I'm still trying to figure that out, to be honest.
Okay.
But yeah, I really already managed to involve IT onto that, because they had the responsibility for the documentation before, and now that's a lot less responsibility. So just they like writing guides. Now you send it to me, and I review it, I correct it, we work on it together, and I publish it. It really makes them happy to contribute. I managed to make the product team contribute, because when they are building a new product, they were always like asking IT to write the guides for the product, sending like Word documents, all that kind of things. So that was pretty easy to convince them to write Markdown directly, so they can shape the guide the way they want. For that, I really provide clear guidelines, like, okay, you want to make an important box, this is the kind of markup you're doing. Like, they have a cheat sheet with everything, all the classes, the HTML classes they can include into their Markdown, everything, so it makes the process really easy, and they feel really happy to write the guides themselves, because in the long term, they really are gaining a lot of time. For the rest of the company, it's like doing presentations about dev relations internally and really explaining the value of that for the company. But if people really don't want to care at some point, there is no magical trick you can use, unfortunately.
Do you have any way to integrate your documentation with your current project? I mean, like some annotation system that extracts the documentation from the code base and then generates the documentation, or at least part of it.
Yeah, you have many ways to do that based on the stack you have, but now for almost all backend languages you have solutions with annotations, like you said, to generate stuff. That's something that can be done, but we didn't want to do it because it kind of makes it really reference-like one-to-one reference. If you're building like an API library, that can be a good thing. When you're building a web API, for example, you will want to add a lot of in-between explanations. Sometimes structure your endpoints a bit differently than the way they are in the code, and so that's why I didn't go that way. Depending on your product, that's really something you could do. So
plenty of solutions depending on your system. The other things, if you're building a new API, from the go is to write the API specification first with something like API blueprint or directly API Meshape or these kind of things, which can generate kind of mock servers and have your API code base reflecting this documentation with automatic tests, which will always make sure that your API is responding in the same way the mock server responding to the specification is, which is a third way to do things. So you can just pick the right way, which is right for your company process and your status in your project. This didn't fit for us, so that's why we wanted something completely different and managed separately from the code base.